Lesson covers Unit 5, Chapter 9 on agriculture. Important part about the agriculture unit is knowing all of the different types of agriculture that is associated with more developed countries and less developed countries. Take quite a bit of time to go over, so I will let you do this on your own. But the types of agricultural regions that are associated with less developed countries include shifting cultivation, also known as slash and burn agriculture, pastoral nomadism, intensive subsistence farming, both rice and not wet rice dominant. And then you also have the plantation farming, which is also considered commercial farming, but in less developed countries. Refer to plantation farming as cash crop farming. You have the agricultural regions in your more developed countries. This includes dairy farming, mixed crop and livestock, grain farming, livestock ranching, Mediterranean, and commercial gardening and fruit farming. You see here can be found in your textbook, but it also will indicate all of the colors that are associated with it as being representative of agricultural regions. So you can see some similarities. You might even associate the similar colors to different climate regions that would be most suitable for that type of agriculture. Agricultural revolutions are a big part of the agriculture unit, and there are three big ones. The first agricultural revolution, which happened about 10,000 BCE, and then it was transitioning from hunting and gathering to agriculture. So this is where plants and animals started to become more domesticated, and then labor was more divided and specialized, coincided with class systems as well. And then going into the second agricultural revolution, this is happening around the 1700s, and it aligns with the Industrial Revolution. And so we see advances from the Industrial Revolution that leads to mechanization and advances in sciences and improved knowledge of fertilizers, soils, selective breeding practices of plants and animals. Land use and property ownership laws in Europe and the United States also resulted in fewer, larger, and more productive farms, displaced a lot of laborers that led to migration of population to urban areas. And then also we see increased food supply supporting population growth. This led to the exponential population growth that we do see continue to happen. And then there's a connection to the Columbian Exchange, colonization, and globalization here. Now we're looking at the third wave of the agricultural revolution. This is from the 1960s to current times. This, again, beginning in the 1960s, would include the Green Revolution, yielding more crops, and then also looking in advancements in plant biology and the development of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, the agribusiness model of companies controlling development, planting, processing, and selling of food products to consumers, a heavy reliance on mechanization and the use of pesticides, fertilizers, large-scale irrigation. You also have crop production, environmental and health implications. Concerns include hybrids, GMOs, fossil fuel dependency, food production, toxicity of water, contamination, soil degradation. So you see like this mass production and these new innovations that may come with health concerns, health risks, and risks to the environment. Have von Thunen's model, which is a part of the agriculture unit. So we're really looking at the center city and its proximity to different types of markets and the distance that those markets are from the city, depending upon what it is that's being produced there. So we also, we're going to see that dairy and horticulture is going to be closest to the city. It's got to be close market-wise because they're more perishable goods. Then you're going to see forestry, and then after that you will see crop rotation, and then animal grazing. The Thunen model will look different if we're looking at an area that is going to be parallel or linear to rivers. So there, here you will see that the different, rather than rings, you're going to see different areas in proximity to the city, which would be at the center of that river. The von Thunen model comes about in the 19th century, and it's based on two primary costs: the cost of land and the distance of reaching your target market. Things to consider about von Thunen's model. So it was created before industrialization, and it's based on the following limiting assumptions: that the city is located centrally within an isolated state where self-sufficiency has no external influences. The isolated state is surrounded by an unoccupied wilderness. The land of the state is completely flat and has no rivers or mountains to interrupt the terrain. The soil quality and climate are consistent throughout the state. Farmers in the isolated state transport their goods to market via ox cart, across land directly to the central city. Therefore, there are no roads, and that farmers also act to maximize their profits. Keep in mind, in the context of today, the rings may not be as definitive. We can kind of see as how, cost of transportation, proximity to market, how that's going to be really impactful. But again, when we're looking at new innovations, travel, the fact that moving automobiles can have refrigeration, the fact that a lot of forestry might be exported. I mean, these are all things and components that are going to challenge von Thunen's model. Into agriculture, there are environmental problems and food security challenges that come with that, especially when it comes to land use management. So, land can be encroached for agricultural uses, land conversion, and habitat loss or biodiversity loss can be had when land is converted for agriculture. And so, also, when we're looking at urbanization, sometimes, developing um, or transitioning that land into urban areas can also be a threat to agricultural land that might be well suited to, grow food that would support a um, a civilization. And then looking at environmental impacts like pollution on soil, water, or air. That is due to intensive agriculture, utilizing the land, stressing the land too much. There can also be an inappropriate use of fertilizers and pesticides that could be really detrimental. High water consumption, soil erosion and degradation, and then agricultural waste. Some big concepts you'll want to pull from the unit on agriculture. So, the development of agriculture led to the widespread alteration of the natural environment. Major agricultural regions reflect physical geography and economic forces. The settlement patterns in rural land use is reflected in the cultural landscape. And lastly, changes in food production and consumption present challenges as well as opportunities. Discuss agriculture surrounding the terms subsistence farming and commercial farming. Again, this can have much to do with your less developed countries, more developed countries. But when we're looking at the meaning, subsistence farming is farming practices in which crops are raised for personal consumption. It's known as subsistence farming. Usually, you're cultivating crops for your own families, maybe for your own small communities. And then for commercial farming, the farming practice in which the farmer grows crops for the purpose of trade, it's called commercial farming. Again, it's more profit motivated. Then when we look to nature, subsistence farming is definitely more labor intensive, commercial farming capital intensive. The area is going to be practiced in smaller areas when we're looking at subsistence farming, and it's going to be practiced over large areas with commercial farming. For productivity, with subsistence farming, it's going to be enhanced through the use of manures, whereas with commercial farming, it's enhanced through higher doses of modern inputs, new innovations with science and technology. And then looking at how crops are grown for subsistence farming, food grains, fruits and vegetables, commercial farming, cash crops and cereals. For the method of irrigation, it may be very dependent for subsistence farming on natural rains or monsoon rains. And then looking at Commercial farming, we've got modern irrigation methods. So these might be systems that are human built. And then for cultivation, for subsistence farming, those are traditional methods being used. And then with commercial farming, machines are used. So when we say traditional, we're usually meaning, labor by hand or, by human labor. Look at agricultural areas, we can often see that agriculture can be associated with more rural areas. And so you might want to know how to identify the different settlements in those rural areas. So you've got your linear settlements, which are usually groups of buildings that are formed along a line, and they usually follow a transportation route like a road, a river, or canal. Some form due to physical restrictions like a mountains, hills, or valleys. And then looking at a clustering, we might see that the surrounding area is going to be not settled in as much, but you may see a cluster of many different houses centered around a certain point, where you see houses, buildings, high population density. And so, yeah, that would be clustered. And then for scattered, that is going to be more common in your rural areas, your very rural areas. And so it's going to be scattered over larger areas. Normally it's agricultural. And so you'll see a lower population density. Typically, you'll see, maybe a cultivation of a larger plot of land, which is why you see a lot of the residencies being more spaced out. To Malthusian theory, that's also a part of the agriculture unit. So Thomas Malthus believed that population was growing faster than the Earth's food supply, and that population increased geometrically while the food supply only increased arithmetically. So, in turn, the population growth was always going to be a threat to the supply of food. Critics of Malthus would say that humans have been able to come up with new innovations that prevent this from happening. And so also that the larger populations that grow, the more common and more likely it will be to come up with these innovations, because larger populations also stimulate economic growth. They also believe that poverty, hunger, and social welfare problems are the result of unjust social and economic institutions, not so much of increasing populations. And so again, critics of Malthus would definitely say that Malthus did not anticipate or foresee how humans would be able to produce much more, and come up with new scientific ways of producing more efficiently as well. And then for neo-Malthusians, they still carry some of the ideas of Malthus, but in the context of today. So the transfer of medical technology leads to a rapid increase in the population in poorer countries. And so, this is where we're seeing the most population growth, or the most rapid population growth. Also, that the world population is outstripping a wide variety of resources, and that wars and civil violence will increase because of the scarcity of food and other resources. So, because of that, because of the increased population growth and taking up or consuming all of the food production, that will lead to even further conflict and civil unrest. Example of Neo-Malthusian might be Bosserup, who was known for coming up with Bosserup theory. And so she believed that an increase in population will simply stimulate scientists to come up with ideas to increase food production, that necessity is the mother of invention. Productivity would be increased by reclaiming land from the sea, selective breeding and crossbreeding, developing high yield plants, genetic modification, terracing, hydroponics, greenhouses, irrigation, artificial fertilizers, switching to new crops, and fish farming.